I played Remnant 2 from level 1 all the way up to the endgame completely solo, an adventure that was equal parts fun and frustrating. In this video, I'll highlight every step I took of that journey from the start to the finish, so let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. To begin, we got a bit of setup to take care of. Remnant 2 takes place about 20 years after the first game, but truthfully, this game can be played without that context. Our overarching goal is simple: save humanity and the universe itself from an apocalypse triggered by something called the Root. I'll give bits and pieces of the story at you as I go, since the story only exists as a vehicle to throw us into some of the most strange and hostile worlds imaginable. Let's get started. I first had to create my character, choosing a body type and a voice. This character creator is pretty basic, but I guess this guy looks good enough. Next, I had to select a difficulty, and this was tougher than I thought. I ended up settling on Survivor since it's the recommended starting difficulty, and free time is a mere figment of my imagination these days. I'll push through this opening section fast so we can get to the action. We are on a mission to find somewhere called Ward 13. Rumor is the place is a safe harbor for what's remaining of humanity. It's not too long until we get our first look at gameplay. Remnant 2 is a third-person shooter at its very core, but it's also a game with a decent melee system. We'll get into the different archetypes that you can roll in this game in a bit, but there are a variety of ways you can play this game. Stamina, of course, plays a core part of combat. Sprinting, rolling, and dodging will all drain whatever stamina you have, making for some really intense encounters down the road. Eventually, we make it to our first bit of combat. This is the Root, the corruption that has seeped into every part of the universe, and I mean every. Gameplay is pretty simplistic to start, but one of my favorite things about this game is the insane build diversity that opens up as you go. Right now, we have bigger problems though. We're hurt, and it's not looking good. Soon after, some folks show up, showcasing powers that we haven't seen before and saving us from our impending doom. These two are Clementine and Beau. Both of them are from Ward 13. As a group, we eventually make it to our first boss encounter. Think of this dude as an introduction to what a boss fight feels like. Almost all the bosses in this game are uniquely designed with different mechanics to deal with. Most of them are really fun, but then there are a couple that really drag things down. Anyway, we kill this Root Mantis and make our way to Ward 13. This place serves as a hub for everything we need. Every merchant, every item, every crafter lives here for the most part. We end up meeting this dude named Ford. Apparently he is the founder of this place, but he's also involved in some pretty heavy stuff, most important of which are the World Stones. We'll be seeing those soon enough. I then make my way to this guy named Wallace, and he is very important because he allows us to pick our archetype. Each one comes with their own set of active skills and passives. Each one also offers a different playstyle, from melee, close range, or a distant approach. I ended up going with the gunslinger. I really just want to dish out as much damage as humanly possible. After getting my gear and checking out my skills, I was ready to roll. I stopped by and introduced myself to Ava. She's the one who crafts all our weaponry for us. These can be mods for our weapons or completely new weapons based on the resource we're using. Mods are tied to an active skill, and these are often powerful otherworldly abilities that help in turning the tide of a fight. I started out with Hot Shot, which granted me a fire bonus on all of my shots. All I had to do was slot it into my weapon mod slot. I also met Riggs. This guy's main purpose is to simply upgrade the weapons we're using, often increasing their damage. The deeper into the upgrades we get, the more rare the resources we'll need become. Alright, that's all over and done with. I meet back up with Ford, and he takes me down to some underground research facility that's been long abandoned. This facility houses the World Stone, one which Ford just decides to activate, and not long after, Ford just disappears. Clementine shows up, and the stone starts to go haywire.
System failure is imminent. The core has been compromised. The utility is required.
The stone just straight up sucks Clementine in, and thus begins our main mission. Bring back Clementine and Ford. This is where Remnant 2 gets very interesting. Let me explain. The game's main sequence can vary quite a bit. My campaign and its order likely isn't the same one that someone else might have had. They could have experienced a completely different sequence of events, and I think that's pretty damn clever. My campaign role first took me to this place called the Forbidden Grove. This area is massive and hostile, just like every other one we'll visit. Everything wants to kill us, so it's best to keep our head on a swivel. Each one of these worlds has its own story. story, its own lore, politics, and more, but each of them is basically affected by the root, causing some sort of corruption. It wasn't long before I ran into my first elite enemy. This game heavily communicates what's going on via sound cues, and there's a very specific sound that plays when things are about to get real. When there's an elite enemy around, you'll know it. Enemies often drop ammo and crafting resources because ammo management is a huge part of this game's loop. The last thing you want to be is out of ammo in the middle of a boss fight. I pick off some more bad guys and find my first checkpoint. These checkpoints allow for fast travel across the whole world. It's very, very useful. Not long after, I stumble into my first boss fight, and my god, I was not ready for this. The fight sounds simple enough. Killed this big ass tree in the middle of everything, but things get crazy very quickly. The little spiky balls that roll at you and cause you to stumble are something straight out of my nightmare. The elite enemies that spawn one after another add to the absolute chaos that this fight devolves into. I knew I was being too eager. I was starting to get impatient, which are the two biggest no-nos when playing a game that has these difficult boss fights. I already know this is a fight that many players likely one-shotted, but not me. Not at all. After about 5 attempts, I finally took the root nexus down. For my efforts, I got a new trait called Blood Bond and a brand new amulet. Traits are when you assign points you earn in combat. Each trait grants some passive boost, and these points really define the build you're going with. I didn't have a particular build in mind at this time. It was still very early, and also this was my first time ever playing the game, so don't laugh too hard by the end of the video. Unfortunately, the Blood Bond trait seemed kind of useless to me, and the Hollowed Egg amulet sounds cool, but I had no intention of playing a melee build this time around. It's all I have for now though, so let's keep it moving. So how the hell do you know where to go in this game? That is a great question. People have mixed opinions on the map on the top right, but overall it seems pretty useful. If a doorway has an exclamation mark on it, that means that's going to lead to the next main progression path. If it doesn't, then you're entering an optional side dungeon. I made an effort to explore all the side content I possibly could. The reason being is because these side dungeons often have really great items and boss fights that you would miss otherwise. I walked into this one and immediately found this cool new ring, granting me a stack of bulwark. What is bulwark, you ask? Well, it's a flat damage resistance of 7%. If you're playing this game without the wiki open, good luck. Anyway, this new area is complete chaos. I just have to mention that I love the enemy designs in this game. Given the fact that the devs had basically what is unlimited freedom thanks to the nature of the story, they really put some thought into crafting some really otherworldly enemy types. You got the flying kind, the robot kind, the weird elf kind, and much, much more. One of my favorite things became wandering into these new realms and being greeted with some new monstrosity. Anyway, I finally hit level 1 on my gunslinger archetype, giving me the swift shot perk. This increases my fire rate and range damage, which scales my gunslinger level. I came across my first aberration. These are basically another level of elite enemies. They come with their own health as well as some traits, and some of these traits get pretty wild. You'll see what I mean later on. I ended up dying, by the way. Dying, of course, means spawning at the last checkpoint, and this also respawns every enemy you've killed along the way. The classic Souls-like experience. These aberrations are random, so this time around I just had to kill this plague bearer. It was the perfect time to use my gunslinger ability. These dudes always drop so much good loot when you kill them. I ended up picking up my first mutator, and these are passive abilities that add some additional perk to your existing weapon. This particular one doesn't really fit my gun, but I don't have any other options at this moment. It's still really early on. Scattered around many of these levels are tomes of knowledge. Finding one of these grants a free trait point. I eventually make it over to this mechanism, and I had no idea what it did exactly, but something definitely happened. Well, it looks like this door has a lit up jewel now. My intuition told me I'd have to find the other 4 to open the door. Before doing that, I took a quick trip to level up my gun in War 13, and on my way back to the checkpoint, I killed an elite and ranked up to level 2. This comes with yet another perk. Unfortunately, this one is pretty pointless considering I'm going about this solo. I started to look for the other 4 mechanisms I had to activate, and all of them had packs of enemies that needed dealing with. Here's one. There's 2. There's 3. And finally 4. And boom, the door is opening. I was expecting some sort of insane boss fight, but instead I was greeted with a brand new helmet. Got an interesting look going on now, but I'll take it. There was also this plate in the middle of the room, but I had no idea what to do with it. I also got my ass kicked by this random dude. Thankfully, the second time around was much cleaner. I was rewarded with the Bloodless King's Vow ring, which grants me a 4% lifesteal with range damage. I used this for pretty much the whole game. This is a strong ring. I should also mention the fragment system. These are small bonuses added to your character, and all this goes into building the ultimate build. Anyway, I had no idea what else to do, so I headed back to the area just outside this dungeon where I killed the root nexus and headed back to the next main mission location. I make it into the Nameless Nest. This area has the same vibe as the previous one, with these statues and ancient looking architecture all corrupted with a little bit of root. I dealt with the same enemies, broke some ancient vases, and found a Tome of Knowledge. I also hit level 3 on my gunslinger, granting me the Quick Hands perk. This granted me a 10% faster reload speed, which is much needed given the weapon I was using. I eventually made it to the next checkpoint, just outside another boss room. I walked through the fog and got greeted with Mother Mind, this gigantic alien crab looking thing. Now, the fight itself isn't too difficult. It has some very obvious mechanics like dodging these swings and hitting some weak spots, but what makes the fight interesting is that the arena slowly shrinks, and you may find yourself without a platform to fight on as the boss constantly breaks them apart. There are also a lot of ads to deal with, but that's a common theme in this game's boss designs. Anyway, it ended up only taking me 2 attempts to bring Mother Mind down, and killing a boss grants a rare resource. This resource is often used to craft a mod or a new weapon based on that boss's abilities. Killing the Mother Mind advances us to the next main area, the Forbidden Grove, and as soon as I enter, there's a bunch of enemies waiting for this moment. Remnant 2 can be a very confusing game with very little direction. I came across this giant mechanism and a lever to activate it, and to say I had no idea what to do would be an understatement. I really wanted to experience the game without using a guide for the first time around, so I moved on and found this dude playing a flute. He gives us a rundown about the area, the history, and so on, but he mentions something or someone called the Ravager, a beast that massacred his people. They couldn't kill him, so they contained him with a song. I explored around a little bit, but I wasn't any closer to figuring out what the hell I was supposed to do. That was until I found this book. The first page had some symbols on it that I found on a giant mechanism, so I figured that was some sort of puzzle solution. I put it in, and boom. Wait, it's still not working. At this point, I didn't really know how the game worked, so I figured my answer was waiting for me elsewhere. I decided to head back to War 13. I could use the Cordyceps gland to get myself the Tremor weapon mod. I also found this guy named Brabus who sells a bunch of different guns. I did some perusing, but I ended up sticking with what I had. There's also this guy named Dwell. He's not human, but he has some really cool items, mostly mutators and such, to really hone in on a specific build you want to play with. I couldn't afford anything here just yet though. I made my way to the Faithless Thicket. These environments are getting darker and more depressing, and it's also filled with these spiky balls. The game offered me very little direction, and this is a common theme with Remnant 2. Depending on the type of player you are, that's the best news ever, or it's a complete turnoff. The game doesn't hold your hand at all. There are a ton, and I mean a ton, of secrets that you'll miss out on your first playthrough, and the game is pretty unique in that sense. A single playthrough means you've probably seen only half the content, if even that. I did manage to hit level 4 on my gunslinger while aimlessly searching through the Faithless Thicket, granting me the Sleight of Hand perk. I also found this Vengeance idol for an amulet which granted me a 30% damage increase when my health was below 50%. It sounds like it'll be good in very tense situations. I eventually found yet another doorway, this one leading to an optional dungeon, so let's check it out. This area is called the Lament, and it is perfectly named. The first area is an environmental puzzle. I needed to navigate in and out of these little sections while dodging through. Right. The second area is a puzzle. There's this giant dial in the middle of the room, and getting the correct order opens the locked door. Believe it or not, I figured this puzzle out after spending about a solid 15 minutes staring at everything. These tombs have a blanket draped over them. The color code in this book was blue, so I had to find each tomb that had a blue blanket draped over it, and also the symbol that was associated with that tomb. I just had to match the symbol in any order on the actual dial. Are you still with me? I opened the door and I worked my way through, running into an aberration and finding the next checkpoint. I grabbed the blood-tinged ring, but I had no idea what else to do. Every other door was locked and I was basically stuck, so I had to let this go for now. I made my way back to the thicket and blasted my way back to the checkpoint. You might be confused as to what on earth is happening at this point, but our main goal is still to find Clementine. Remember that girl who got sucked into the World Stone at the beginning? All the actions that I've taken so far will lead to that, hopefully. I find another way in the thicket, which leads me to the Twisted Chantry. This area is filled with these giant runes. They're all underground, but they're cursed with the root just like everything else. It's claustrophobic and it gets hectic. I ended up hitting level 5 on my gunslinger, which granted me a new active skill called a Sidewinder. This increases my movement speed by 50% and my weapon swap by 35%. Honestly, I think my already equipped skill is better, so I kept it rolling for now. There was something really off about this section and it didn't take me too long to notice. I started shooting these blue crystals on the faces of these statues, and shooting them all opens up a door leading underground. You see what I mean about secrets? I find myself underground, absolutely scared for my life. I open a chest and grab the lithic signet, which grants me a nice little damage reduction, and this is where things completely shift. The statue came alive, and every time I turned around, it would get closer and closer. I'm not gonna lie, this scared the hell out of me. I tried to use my tremor ability to kill him, but I just ended up dying, and I never went back down there. I worked my way through the chantry, killing everything in sight until I reached the next checkpoint and the next boss room. Here we go. As mentioned, every boss fight in this game is a unique experience, and this one is pretty interesting. The Legion fight requires managing the adds that attack you while also shooting at the boss's weak point. The catch is that you cannot stare at the boss's weak point for too long or you just die. In all honesty, the fight wasn't hard at all. I did end up killing Legion in only one attempt, but it was a pretty fun fight all things considered. Down goes Legion, and off we go. Back once again in the Faithless Thicket. I spend some trait points and move on. I end up running into this massive tree, and from it emerges this weird elf-like creature who goes by Madra. She asks me a series of questions, each with morally divisive answers, and depending on how you answer these questions, you get one of two items. I ended up getting the Eye of the Ravager, which granted me a new trait. I head back to Ward 13 to get some upgrades, the first of which is something called the Fargazer. This is an awesome ability which spawns an eye to deal damage on whoever you're currently aiming at. I also upgraded my sidearm a bit just in case. Alright, once again, we're going back to the Faithless Thicket. We've been going back and forth quite a bit now. Thankfully, I was at least able to hit level 6 as a gunslinger and grab yet another Tome of Knowledge. Let's start to lock in a bit here. I'm back at where the weird mechanism was with the symbols, and I had to figure it out because at this point, I've been everywhere. Turns out there was a lever I had to pull to activate the damn thing. Those huge detours that I was taking weren't even related, but at least I got some cool items out of it. I activate the lever, then I go back at the bottom and it plays a nice little melody which builds the bridge right in front of us. It's time to head into what will likely be a huge boss fight. I ended up coming across the Ravager himself. He looks terrifying and he looks absolutely malformed. But he gives us a bit of a rundown of the current situation, something about time and death and how decisions we make lead to eternal greatness or something like that. The choice he gives us, however, is simple. Either kill the helpless doe who is sitting and minding its own business, or we enter a boss fight with the Ravager. I thought about this for a very long time. I had no idea what impact my choice would ultimately make, and I didn't want to screw up my playthrough. After some thinking, I shot the damn doe in the head. This grants me a strange item and something called the Ravager's Mark, which increases my damage to bleeding targets. I touch the World Stone, and this time things are different. Instead of having a fast travel option, I'm kicked out into some new realm called the Labyrinth. A completely different vibe and atmosphere in every sense. You gotta love it. This world has these portals to go through and all sorts of new threats to deal with. Before carrying on, I did head back to Ward 13. I talked to Dwell, and I find this awesome new mutator which grants me increased range damage after ADSing, and this is massive for my build. Back to the Labyrinth, I have a lot to figure out. The enemies here, however, are pretty interesting. They're these stone constructs that range from tiny one-shots to the massive ones that require a ton of shots to take down. The weak spots are obvious at least. I pick off some more enemies and continue working my way through. This level feels like it's almost never ending. There are so many paths and doorways to go through, but they all just lead back to this one pedestal. Anyway, I go through the portal thinking I made progress and it disappears right from under me. I learned my lesson, but I couldn't help but imagine how pissed I'd be if I was playing this game on hardcore mode. I find this room, which is basically a gauntlet. This giant orb in the middle slowly formed, and we need to stay alive as it does. In the meantime, we're dealing with a ton of different enemies. And after wrapping things up, we're given a new trait called Amplitude. This would be awesome for some builds, but it didn't really matter much for mine. We were here for a reason, of course, and it was for the Master Portal Key. Remember that pedestal when we walked in that needed something? Well, this is that something. And boom, we're through. This place looks awesome. Look at these statues. They must tell some crazy story. Unfortunately, I hardly know what's going on at this point. There's a checkpoint nearby, which usually means we got a big boss fight coming up. And I was right. But this is probably the most unique fight I've seen in any of these games. It's an environmental puzzle mixed in with some precision combat. These giant stones slowly work their way towards you, but they also have these weak points on them. To win this fight, I needed to shoot every last block of light, and there were a bunch of them. The fight kept me moving, almost never standing in one spot. There's a ton of trial and error, as well as memorization involved. It took me many attempts to get this done, but I eventually prevailed. The cubes are dead. Alright, now this is the part of the game where they throw a ton of lore at us, but I'm gonna make this as simple as humanly possible. The root, which is the source of corruption, is connected to the world stone system, which means it can keep reaching into all these other worlds, and we've already seen it affect some others. We need to get to the source of it, and to do so, we need to get a couple of items called segments. These segments will allow us to get to where that source is. However, to get these segments, we need to travel to other realms, kill the big bad guys there, and collect what we came for. Oh, also, Clementine is here. She's wrapped up in all this too, but she's an ally wanting to help fight the good fight. After speaking to this giant eyeball who goes by the Keeper, we're granted a biome portal key. The Labyrinth has portals that we can use, and this key grants us that ability. So let's get a move on. I make a quick pit stop at Ava and craft the cube gun. This is a unique sidearm that literally shoots cubes. It doesn't have ammo in a typical sense, but it does overheat if you shoot it too much. I just wanted to try something new at this point, so I went along with it. Back in the Labyrinth, I use the portal key and head into this new portal, and I find myself in a completely new world called the Seeker's Rest. I mean, take a look at this place. Talk about a change of atmosphere. I love how different each of these worlds are from one another. Anyway, I find this huge floating robot, and they can't seem to believe that we exist.
How did you find the route?
Robot tells us to find its tower somewhere in the wastes beyond, and it sounds like a plan because I don't have anything else to do here, I guess. I've already said it once, but these worlds all have their own stories, their own histories, and events taking place, and I really liked what the devs did with that approach. Anyway, I start making my way through the Phantom Wasteland. This planet is absolutely ugly in the best way possible. You got these tall spires sticking out of the ground, a dense gray atmosphere, and the vibes here just aren't fun at all. Enemy design is amongst what we've already kind of seen. Yeah, the flying type is pretty common here, but it's not long before I run into these weird human-like dudes and different life forms altogether. Tight corridors and chaotic encounters define many of the locations in this world. Let's reiterate our goal here. Find a tower so we can talk to the one non-hostile person. The encounters in this particular world I felt were more difficult, and there was a lot more going on. Enemy types felt more sophisticated, so to speak. I eventually make my way to this checkpoint and I finally get to use the prism system. This system grants us permanent buffs that we can constantly level as we progress. The prism holds 5 traits such as range crit chance, healing effectiveness, and many more. It's a nice layer of progression that really adds to build variety, and you really want everything in sync by the time you're playing Apocalypse difficulty or you're gonna get absolutely demolished. I kill an aberration and use a glyph to make my way to the logistics bridge, kill more enemies, and continue progressing through the wasteland. I managed to hit level 7 as a gunslinger, but this level's design was starting to get to me. I wanted to explore everything, but I also wanted to get the hell out of this planet. It was a double-edged sword. This whole world felt like it had to be the largest that I've been to so far. Anyway, I found the main path which led me to the Putrid Domain. That name could not be more fitting. I absolutely hated this place. Maybe that's the feeling the game wanted me to have though. I kill a ton of enemies as I make my way through. Eventually, I found the next checkpoint and nearby was the next boss fight, the Abomination. We've actually seen this enemy before, but this is a more advanced version. He flies and jumps around like a beast, but the only problem for him is that he has a bunch of mines attached to him that reveal his weak spots once you blow them up. This fight was another one tap, and I spent some trait points and leveled my prism. Now, truthfully, I didn't know how important the prism was, so I was kind of selecting whatever. As I mentioned, this thing is a huge part of creating an optimal build. Anyway, let's continue working towards that damn tower. But first, a quick pit stop at Briggs. I had to upgrade my gun, and I also upgraded my mutator, granting me an even greater damage bonus. Alright, back to the hellhole we go. I frantically run around eliminating everything in sight and find yet another side dungeon to go through. This time I'm at the Void Vessel facility. I clear out a ton of enemies and run around like a complete maniac. Eventually I level up my gunslinger archetype once more and find the 0 hour amulet, which changed my build big time. If I had a light equipment load, I'd gain 20% greater damage and a 10% higher crit chance. I just had to strip down at that point. Off with the helmet and the body armor. I also sat in this chair which transported me to an optional boss fight. Like other boss fights, we had some ads to deal with, but maintaining focus on the boss was the best approach. He was down in a single attempt. Alright, I'm done with the facility, let's head back. I roamed through the wasteland amongst enemies and giant machinery. To say I was lost would be an understatement. This world had a ton of side dungeons and I did the majority of them, but I was ready to get the hell out of here, so I made a beeline towards the tower and up an elevator. This level genuinely felt never ending, but I promise we're finally at the tail end. I fight through a ton more enemies and make my way to the next boss room. This time around we're fighting the Nerudian Reaper, a giant purple cyber spider that disappears and reappears at will. I was pretty locked in for this fight, and it's one of the few fights that doesn't have any ads to deal with. It's straightforward and relatively easy. And down goes the Reaper. So two things. We still need to find that robot in the tower, and we still need to find a segment. I bet you probably forgot about that by now. Finally, the tower. I use all the keys that I've been collecting and the door rolls open. That disembodied voice talks to us once more. They're dealing with some things on a scope that we honestly would never understand. The fate of their world lies in a decision that is of course left to us. Out of nowhere comes Sha'Hala. Another one of this game's shining boss fights with numerous mechanics to consider and a constant need for situational awareness. Awareness that I was clearly lacking. I ended up taking them down on the second attempt. The disembodied voice is happy, and it seems like my work here is done, as I got my first segment. Back to the Labyrinth we go, but not before I stop at Ava and craft this badass looking blade. Alright, it's time to head into another world. What surprises await me, I have no idea. I think now would be a good time as ever to give a quick summary of the events that have unfolded. We know that the root has corrupted not just Earth, but any realm that's connected through the Labyrinth. The World Stones are a vehicle for the root to make its way to these different realms, but that wasn't their original purpose. Our journey so far has taken us through multiple worlds, all with their own history and politics, and our role so far has often been to serve as a problem solver by mostly killing the realm's bad guys. It should be noted that the story I've experienced so far is likely different from what other people had during their first playthrough, and that's what makes this game unique. Now, of course, the main story of finding a segment and doing all that is the same, but the worlds and the order in which you experience them and the events that take place on them can be different. With that being said, we've collected one segment piece, but we still need another, so let's actually move into the other world. We arrive at the Beatific Palace. This world and region is absolutely beautiful. Gilded halls draped in gold, gorgeous architecture and design. I love this area, and it's a big change from the hellscape we were just on. The enemies here are pretty interesting, but nothing we haven't already seen mechanically. They have these angel-like wings, and some prefer melee spear attacks while others float above you and drop in beams of light. I need to find the two masks that we saw on the giant door earlier. There's a mechanism involving them, and they're clearly somewhere around here. As you might expect though, this journey is anything but straightforward. I kill a ton of enemies and find my first mural piece. That was pretty quick, but the second mural piece won't come as easy. I loved exploring this location though. I came across this wall that clearly needs some item to get through, but unfortunately I do not have it. So it's time to start wandering aimlessly. I come across this random dancing jester, and truthfully I thought he was an enemy, so I just started blasting. Thank God you cannot kill NPCs in this game. He gives me a magic quill, and this will let us access rooms that we couldn't get through before. I eventually make it to the next area called the Council Chamber. It looks pretty similar to the last location, and I push my way through countless more enemies and eventually find this magic painting. And yes, of course, we can enter it, so off I go. In the Council Tribunal, I was completely lost. I had no idea what to do. There were some books, but all things considered, it was a pretty tiny side area. Thankfully, I do manage to hit level 9 as a gunslinger, and just one more and I've maxed out my archetype. Then it's on to multi-classing. Yeah, you can equip 2 archetypes in this game. Anyway, I eventually found these thrones with these color-coded keys, and they didn't seem to be in the right spot, so I switched them to the corresponding color based on what I saw in the reflection. This was one of the easier puzzles that this game offered. Doing this opened up a large door. I was thinking this would be a boss fight, but I guess the boss is already dead. I grabbed myself a new ring, which would be awesome for an assassin's build, and head on my way out. I still felt like I was missing something. I left the painting and came back to reality. Then I found these 3 members sitting on the council's thrones. They weren't there before. I swear they weren't. Anyway, I struck up a convo and they admit that the king has been killed. Remember that giant dude that we just saw sitting on the throne? The catch is one of these 3 has killed the king, so there's a traitor amongst them. We need to find that traitor. There weren't really any leads, but my best bet was going back to the painted world to investigate. And would you look at that? A dagger right in his back. Investigating this dagger clues us in and helps us solve the crime. Inspecting it reveals a purple symbol, and now we can actually make an accusation. I accuse the person sitting to the right, and well, they admit it. For my efforts, I was awarded with a blade. Now, it should be noted that this can have a completely different outcome. You can accuse the wrong person or fight all 3 of them, I believe. That's the type of freedom that this game allows, which I think is hilarious. Of course, I didn't experience all these different scenarios, but the game does have an adventure mode that lets you play through these areas over and over again, experiencing all the differences between them. Now, that little side story has nothing to do with the main quest, so let's continue our journey. I use the magic quill and find myself in a new area called Ironborough, or in other words, Bloodborne. Before we go down that route, I head back to War 13. Cass is here. Remember her from the beginning? She's a merchant now and she sells some pretty cool stuff. There are a number of merchants, all of whom sell their own little accessories like rings, consumables, and so on. I didn't really buy anything, so it was time to go back to Bloodborne. I take like 5 steps into this new area and have my first encounter with the Huntress. What a welcoming party. Anyways, she leaves, but I'm sure we'll be meeting again. This area is unique because of its layout. It had a lot of verticality to it, and it's clearly set in some really rundown city. Enemies wield guns, throwables, chainsaws, and that guy looks kind of familiar. I make my way through, and I'm kind of just exploring, not so much with purpose, but just to see what's around. Remember, at this point, we are looking for 2 masks for that mural outside that giant door. We had already found one, but this second one is proving to be much more tricky. I eventually run run into the Huntress again, but she didn't really pose much of a threat. Honestly, don't even think she was a real boss. I ended up finding this side area called a Postulant's Parlor, which consisted of this one puzzle. It's pretty simple. You just need to line up 3 of your pieces in a row, whether vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. It's too bad I completely screwed up time and time again, and each time I made a mistake, I would get a stack of curse. With the magic of video editing, we don't have to see just how many attempts this took. Also, I'm pretty sure the statue I was playing against just let me win, because they could have easily just blocked my piece from winning. Oh well, I'll take it. For our efforts, we're rewarded with a royal hunting bow. I had no choice but to use this thing. I hauled myself back to War 13 and put a ton of upgrades on it and was ready to rock and roll. It had been a while since I even used a new weapon. Oh yeah, this thing was one-shotting most enemies, which was exactly what I needed. Anyway, it was time to continue working my way through, finding myself in the sunken haunt. Things are looking more dire than ever. Buildings are on fire, people are turning into ashen statues, all hell has broken loose here. It's crazy how different the atmosphere of this area is compared to what I started with at the very beginning. If Gunfire Games ever makes a Remnant 3, I hope they expand the scope big time. I continue killing everything in sight while working my way towards the next checkpoint, enemies ranging from pretty easy to slightly terrifying. And then I made it to the area's boss. She's looking like a real hunter if you catch my drift. The fight itself isn't too bad. I got to use my new bow, but it proved kinda useless in the phase where she sent in a ton of ads. However, fighting her was pretty simple. I just dodged her super telegraphed attacks and I was good to go. Another boss defeated in the first attempt. Now you're probably thinking to yourself that it's because I'm playing on survivor difficulty, and yeah, I'd agree. It was right around this time I had an itch to pump up the difficulty, but I figured I'd just save it for the boss rush mode when I make it to the end game. I make it back to the palace, and inside I find that weird jester once more. He throws out a few cards with one symbol that we clearly need to follow. Thankfully, my eyes still work decently enough, and I was able to get the second piece of the mask. Back to that giant door we go. On my way there, I hit level 10 as a gunslinger, unlocking my final active ability, the Bullet Storm. This one essentially buffs us across the board. Reload speed, crit chance, fire rates, and even single shot weapons become fully automatic. Pretty wild. Now that we are level 10, however, we can multi-class, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Back at the door, I place in the mural pieces, but before going any further, I head back to War 13 to figure things out. Now, multi-classing in this game is very powerful. You gain the passive and active traits of both classes, which can make for some pretty good combos. In order to multi-class, I needed to buy an item specific for the class that I want to go with. I made the decision that I would be using the Hunter archetype as my secondary, which required this rusty metal. I bought what I needed and talked to Wallace. He was able to craft the engram for me, which enabled the Hunter archetype, and the first perk that comes with it being Deadeye, which granted me a 4% range damage bonus, and this also increases with my Hunter level. So I got some work to do. Alright, back to the palace with a giant door open. I walk in and find what I can only assume is a god waiting for me. This dude looks insane, in a good way. He tells us that he killed the one true king. Remember that council that we met with? I guess this guy was aided by the traitor. Anyway, he tells us that he has an imposter in the shadow realm, so to speak, and that he wants us to go and kill him. This imposter is more or less also claiming to be king, which creates this awkward tension between the two. And the game presents us with an option. We can either listen and go kill that imposter, or we can just kill this guy sitting in front of us. For some reason, I felt like it would be a complete turn of events if I ended up killing him instead, so after some thinking, it was time to fight. This fight is pretty damn cool. A large arena with ample space to dodge around in. Faelin likes to close in with melee attacks. He's fast, he's powerful. He also likes to use the environment to his advantage and call in some ads when things are looking dire. Overall though, it's a great fight. I was able to kill him with a single attempt, and doing so grants me another segment. That's 2 now, so we can pay a visit back to the Labyrinth. Before that, I decided to craft a new gun. This one is called Deceit, and it shoots these cool looking projectiles. The bow was working just fine up to this point, but I really just wanted to try something new. Alright, off to the Labyrinth, and things are starting to get a bit weirder now for sure. That giant eyeball that we were talking to is now a guy wearing a shroud, and he's a tall, pale, alien looking thing. He tells us about how he tried to contain the roots, kept the corruption from spreading, but something called the Destroyer killed the Labyrinth's guardian, allowing the Destroyer to act as a conduit and help corruption spread unchecked. He also tells us that there is a solution, one that he had not considered, which is something called the Index. This is basically a backup of the universe. This would essentially allow a reboot of reality. To use the Index, however, we need to get to the source. This has been our goal all along, so I guess we're making good progress. We just need to get to where the source actually is, which turns out it's on something called Root Earth. We arrive on this Earth and things are looking great if you ask me. The Ashen Wasteland is living up to its name, and for the first time I get to use my new weapon. Truthfully, I didn't love it. This area has a ton of smaller enemies, and this weapon is a charge weapon, meaning I have to hold down the fire button for a second or so before it goes off. I tried putting the sequence shot mutator on it to help, but honestly, it just wasn't getting the job done. I was disappointed to say the least. It wasn't long before I switched back to my bow. The next section was brutal, like this whole area, and that's fine. It's the end game. It should feel more difficult. My build should be tested, and it was. I died over and over and over again. At this point, I wasn't used to this feeling. I was cruising through this game for the most part, and hitting this roadblock was kind of surprising. Eventually, though, I prevailed, and with it, I got a new trait. The handling trait, which helped with weapon sway and recoil. I dumped my points into it for now. I pushed through and eventually make it to the first real boss fight in this area. Cancer. Yes. Its name is Cancer. Now, this fight wasn't too difficult. There are some things to watch for, like these roots coming out of the ground or some other AoE attacks, but overall, this fight was pretty easy. I ended up moving into the Corrupted Harbor, where I try out some new weapons, like this AR that sprays full auto. I know what you're thinking. Why on earth would you switch it up at the very last section? Well, because I'm a deranged lunatic. No, in reality, I just wanted to try some new stuff out. I still had my handy bow and arrow, which I can switch to when I needed to. I blast through a ton of enemies and find the next boss, Venom. Okay, now this was a fun fight. This dude had so many different attacks. He would swoop in for melee or fall back and do some massive AoE attack. He could spawn in these fireballs that made this fight even harder than it already was. I felt challenged here and I really liked it. However, I knew I had to put the AR down. It wasn't doing me any favors, so I went back to the bow and arrow. The third time around, I was able to take him down, which leads into this new area with Clementine and the Keeper waiting for me to arrive. This is the absolute final fight. And my god, I had no idea what I was getting into. This was by far one of the hardest and most frustrating fights I've experienced in any video game. The fight itself is against this giant bone dragon, which goes by Annihilation, and it's a fitting name. I died almost immediately, and at that moment, I knew I was going to be in for some really sweaty gameplay. I died and died, but I learned and I started to understand the timings, the attacks, the rhythm, and I felt like I was getting closer and closer to defeating this thing. I made the pivot back to my gun. I just had to put the bow away, and I had finally done it. Then I realized there was a second phase, and I died as soon as I entered it. So this Annihilation fight was something I just had to look up, strictly because I was wondering how people possibly beat it. The subreddit was full of complaints calling the fight unfair, too difficult, and a big spike in difficulty. These are all true, but one comment mentioned turning off the music to hear the sound cues better in the second phase. So I did. But I kept dying though. Things didn't feel easier, but I was getting further and further each time. The first phase was a cakewalk at this point, but the second one wasn't getting easier. I tinkered my build, I tried everything. It took me over an hour of attempts to get to a point where I felt confident. You could just see the progress in my gameplay. And then it finally happened. I took down Annihilation. Honestly, at one point, it felt like I would never get this done, and the worst part about it is, I did it on the lowest difficulty that the game had to offer. Either way, we made it to the final cutscene, and we learned that the corruption is too strong. The only way to deal with it is by restoring the universe completely. Clementine instead ends up sacrificing herself, I guess, and she just starts taking in everyone's soul, and I mean everyone. The ending implies that she stores or preserves reality inside the Index, allowing the system to be restored instead of simply erased forever. What's funny is that in this final cutscene, I saw a number of NPCs that I never even found, and the only way to do that would be to go through the adventure mode or re-roll the campaign. So that's the end of the story. Yeah, it was pretty okay, I guess. There was not too much to remember, and it really just served as a vehicle to go to all these strange locations. But overall, the game itself is pretty damn fun. So I made it through the campaign completely solo, but that's not even remotely all there is to do. I still have to fully level my hunter class, and the fastest way to do so would be through the game's boss rush mode. Oh man, I fell in love with this game mode. So let me break it down. There are 3 tiers of challenges. In one, you face 3 bosses. In another, you face 6 or 7 if I'm not mistaken. And in the final one, you face 19. Yes, 19 bosses, and the best part about it is how fast you level. Each boss clear rewards a large amount of XP, and there's also the possibility to get rare loot and resources for crafting and upgrading. So I decided to get started with the lowest tier boss rush. Triple threat on survival difficulty. So how does this work exactly? Well, before each boss room, there's a room of enemies to eliminate. You eventually fill a meter up and then take on an aberration. Defeating him allows you access to the boss room. But there are also these crystals which offer a buff. These buffs are pretty game changing and sort of create this whole roguelike experience on top of it all. It's so fun. The best part about the boss rush is the simple fact that I got to go up against bosses that I never even saw before. Entirely new experiences that tested me to the fullest. So on my first rush attempt, I killed the Stone Warden. In the second area, I killed the Reaper. And in the third area, I killed Tal Ratha. 2 of those 3 bosses I never even fought before. This became the main mode that I played. I knew I can jump into adventure mode, but I was so locked into this. I ended up getting my hunter level to 3 and unlocked a few perks to go along with it. My build was only getting stronger as I went on. I tried my hands on the trial by fire gauntlet, and I even bumped up the difficulty and got absolutely clapped. I was not ready, but I wasn't about to give up either way. I enjoyed this way too much to stop. My second attempt went smoother, but I ran into the most frustrating boss fight since Annihilation, the Primogenitor or something like that, but this boss wants you to focus on this blue little crab-like thing. Hitting it is the only way to deal damage. The problem is all these additional enemies who can poison you or who like to cling onto you. It is absolute chaos. And after what seemed like 10 minutes, I finally killed the boss and made it into the second area. This time around, I was fighting the Bloat King. Another fight where things aren't too obvious and the floor is basically lava. The key here is to shoot the blue bubbles that the Bloat King emits. The only way to do this would be above the water area. Eventually, I figured it out and down goes the Bloat King. I was progressing pretty well on a higher difficulty as well. In the third area, I fought the metaphysical version of Tal Ratha. This one uses portals and all sorts of trickery. It is such a fun fight, but too bad I died. However, look at this XP gain. Some boss rushes were pretty decent and other ones ended like this. I did this over and over again, fighting bosses new and old and just having a really good time with it. Veteran difficulty was challenging enough, and I knew my build wouldn't be ready for Apocalypse anytime soon. The hardest boss I ran into was Alepsis Tara. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out its attack pattern. So I continued, but I would die and die and die again. At one point, I dropped the difficulty back to Survivor to see if I can even complete this particular gauntlet. I made it to the end and found my old friend Annihilation waiting for me, and unfortunately I couldn't get the job done. I made it all the way to the end once more, but ran into Tara as the final boss, and once again I just couldn't get the job done. My subsequent runs were all a bit worse, but through it all I was gaining XP. Enough XP to push me as close as humanly possible to maxing out both my archetype. I decided to quickly roll a new adventure mode just to get some quick kills and get that final level unlocked, and boom. There it is, level 10 on both archetypes. Now, experienced players will note that this isn't actually the max level that you can attain in the whole game. You can level your Prism all the way up to 51, and the traits go up to 85. For the sake of this video though, I figured I would just level my classes to their max. So that's a wrap on my Remnant 2 adventure, but that's not it for my actual playtime. I am still grinding boss rush, I'm still trying to get to Apocalypse, and I still want to beat the gauntlet. Through it all though, Remnant 2 is an awesome game. I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. I love the build variety, the customization options. I love the different environments and level design. It was honestly just a joy to play through. Sure, there are some frustrations and some boss designs are questionable at best, but overall, this game was an experience that I just couldn't put down. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing, and I'll see you all in the next one.